Well, hello, and welcome everyone. I'm Laura Brandenburg from Bridging the Gap, and we are live on LinkedIn and YouTube today to talk all about navigating change and how to use business process mapping techniques to elevate your career success. So if you are listening in, if you could just let me know where you're at, where you're joining from, that would be great. I would love to hear from you. It always gives me a sense to know that people are watching and that all the tech has worked as well. So a quick comment about that would be amazing. So as we're kind of getting going and waiting for people to join in, I just wanted to talk a little bit about myself and Bridging the Gap. Bridging the Gap was founded back in 2008, and it is now an online training company focused on delivering practical, real-world training, specifically to help business analysts build on-the-job practical skill sets. So hello, oh my goodness, all of a sudden all the comments started flowing in. So all over the place. I see the UK, I see all different kinds of states in the United States, Victoria, Canada. Welcome, welcome. Hello, welcome everyone. All right, we got great crew here. Thank you. India, Canada, Poland. All right, welcome, welcome. So great to see all of you. So what my very first experience with process mapping was actually when I was a quality assurance engineer. So if you've ever heard about me and my story, I was in this editorial role where I just really was not having a lot of fun career-wise, feeling very burnt out, but also underemployed and bored out of my mind. Right. And I managed to get myself onto a technology project as a business subject matter expert, which led to me getting an experience in the quality assurance team or an actual role in the quality assurance team. And that role led me to my first quote unquote business analyst role. My title was technically systems analyst, but I think of it as a business analyst role. But in that QA role, what I did was build a test process. So I was testing an area of the system that didn't have a lot of process around it, that was approached in a very ad hoc way by the business, not so much by the formal QA team. And I put together what was a test plan, but that test plan was 90% the same across every project. So what was really in that test plan was a process. And when I started to think about the business analysis experience I'd had throughout my career, when I actually applied for my CBAP and had to document all those hours of experience, I realized it had started all the way back in my quality assurance role, not just in that systems analysis role, not just in the roles that were more formal business analysis, but really in that quality assurance role as well. And that really led me into more of a business analysis role. And we're going to talk about more about some of those career opportunities that come about when you start to do business process analysis. So I am going to share some slides just to keep us all focused and on track and give us a few visuals to pull from. Let's see what looks best. No, this way. Okay. So you should be able to see the slide here. That's the business analyst blueprint slide. Welcome from Chicago, Illinois, open to work. Great way to like shine the flag and bring in the opportunity. So this is a great technique as well when you are looking to get more experience as a business analyst and build that on the job experience. There's always a way to analyze a business process. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But where this fits into the whole set of techniques, I mentioned at the beginning that Bridging the Gap is a provider of business analysis training, real world skills and techniques. This is the business analyst blueprint, which is both a framework that we teach and use to organize how we teach business analysis skills, but also a great visual model of what kinds of techniques to be thinking about as a BA. So along the bottom here, you see the 8-step business analysis process framework. That is also a very simple version of a business analysis or a business process, but it's a business process that we use to do business analysis, a bit meta, right? But it's our 8-step framework for how to approach a project. Then along the top, we have all the different techniques that we teach. And what we're going to be focusing on today is that upper left side, the analysis technique of a process flow diagram, and why to do that, what it looks like, a few tips for to do it successfully. And I will talk as well about the business process mapping workshop that I'm running next week, which will be like if you want to get more into the how to do that and how to leverage it and do that side by side with me and a lot of other business analysts, that's a great approach or a great next step to take. So we'll be talking about that business process flow diagram, a little bit about the business process model. And so those are the analysis techniques at the business level that are basically like, how does the business do what it does? And then each of these techniques, some of them are analysis techniques, which would be the things that we would think about us doing like behind the keyboard, right? How do we actually thinking about the requirements? How are we putting things together? What documents or visual models are we creating as we analyze? But those go hand in hand with communication techniques. Business analysis never happens in a vacuum, right? So how are we discovering in the case of a business process, in the case of that software level, which is what the software needs to do, not how the software needs to be built, but what functionally does a user need to experience? That's where we look at techniques like use cases and wireframes and communication techniques like reviews and validation and also user stories to collaborate with your agile teams if you're on an agile team. And then we have our information, our data level, which is very technique level heavy because there's a lot of analysis that goes into that. But it's also business focused. And when you think about the glossary and the language that you might use to talk with a business user. So today, I just wanted to give you the kind of the big picture of what we cover and some techniques to be thinking about. But again, today we're going to focus on that business flow diagram. And Kenya says, I'm already signed up for that, and I'm going to be joining from Dominican Republic on vacation. That is amazing. Congratulations to you. And I'm so honored that you find it valuable enough to join on your vacation. I can't say that I would be running this from the Dominican Republic, but that's amazing. And I'm so glad that you're going to be there. It's going to be a lot of fun. Okay, so what is a business process? Would the blueprint help you onboard a new team? I'm going to show that comment real quick before we can actually go back to the blueprint. It's definitely a great technique or a great set of techniques to be thinking about in terms of what skill sets do you have on your team and what skills do you use and what techniques do you use as part of your business analysis process in your organization. So yes, would be a great way to think about onboarding. We also have an opt-in or a free resource called the Business Analyst Skills Assessment. If you Google Bridging the Gap plus Skills Assessment, it will come up for you. And it allows you to do a comparison and a skills assessment essentially against all of these different techniques in the depth and degree to which you have experience. So that would be another great resource as well. Okay. So a business process is a set of steps or activities that are performed in a repeatable fashion. So it could be something that you do every day, multiple times a day. We have a business process for setting up a LinkedIn Live like this. In fact, we're setting up our next one right now, and those tasks are going into our project management tool, but we have a process for that, right? Of what pieces I do, what pieces people on my team do, how the thumbnail gets created, and all of those pieces. So that's a process we do about once a month because we host one of these close to once a month, not every month. But you could have something you do multiple times a day, like managing a customer service request, right? It could be something you do month to month, week to week. It could be even annually, like something that you only do once a year. Those processes I find are extremely valuable because when you're doing something as infrequently as quarterly or seasonally or once a year, it's easy to forget the details, right? So I have a process that I use to manage our cash flow within the business and also now within our personal cash flow. And so that, like, I have to look at that, even though it's a monthly process, it's just complex enough that I need to look at it and remind myself and do all the steps. Otherwise, I tend to forget something and then there's not enough money in all the right accounts. So, just think about those things that you do over and over again. And there's always benefit in having that repeatable, documented process. And you can look at a process that you use, a process for your organization. It could also be something that you complete in a home environment, like I talked about my personal finance, cash flow management process. So what does a process map actually look like? I just wanted to kind of give a quick review. I'm going to talk a little bit more about why we do that, but I know some people would get that definition and some people need to see what this might look like, right? And so you see we have a starting and an ending point. and also multiple steps and flows along the way. So a process maps allows you to capture a lot of variations and decisions. I'm going to walk you through what some of those key elements are here in just a minute, but this is what the end result might be of a business process mapping exercise. So why do you do this? Right? Why do you map a business process? And it really depends on the context that you're in and where you're at in your career. So I would love to hear in the chat, like, who is a practicing business analyst today that's applying process mapping maybe on their projects? Or are you looking to get into a BA role, or possibly you have another use for business process mapping? I'm in a lot of entrepreneurial circles, and one of my mastermind buddies had her director of operations join the process mapping workshop, because within a small company, you need to map your processes just like anyone, right? And so that person isn't necessarily officially a business analyst, but they could be doing business analysis work within that director of operations role. But why would you map it if you are a practicing BA? So one of the examples that I have to share was from Arcana, and she had a situation where she, a lot of times we're just told, go get the requirements, figure out what the software needs to do, right? Get into the details. Like we should have been started building the solution yesterday, just figure out what it needs to do. And that sounds great on the surface until you actually ask people, like, what do you need the software to do? And they're like, we don't know. I don't know what it needs to do, right? So like that, when you, and she was in this situation where she kept asking like good questions about software requirements, but not getting a lot of great answers because the stakeholders just didn't know. So process mapping can help improve that stakeholder engagement because you are engaging them at the kind of information that they should have a better handle on. How does their work flow today? Even if they're using a spreadsheet, even if they're using an old clunky system, even if they're using like Post-it notes on their desk and like, writing things down, whatever that process is, it allows you to talk about or get information about where they're at today versus what they might want a piece of software to do for them in the future, right? So it's an improved stakeholder engagement. It also gets answers to these requirements related questions. So once you start to understand the business process and analyze the business process, you'll be able to help see, oh, we could use software to automate this piece. We could eliminate pieces because there's just overlap between how these two departments handle things. There's so many opportunities to improve. So you start to get a better handle of the requirements. You also start to find opportunities just to improve that process. I'm going to take a quick look at the comments here. I use mapping to teach my students. Let's see, I use mapping to teach my accounting and auditing students. I use it in my accounting consulting business. That sounds really exciting. I'm a systems analyst, and I use process mapping a lot. I process improvement to understand the current scenario and identify pain points. Perfect. I'm a BA who dislikes process mapping. Well, I'm so glad you're here. I get hung up on the actual diagramming and would much prefer a text bulleted and numbered document. So we actually do teach both at Bridging the Gap. We teach the process map and a written document. I think the document gives you more clarity and depth of detail, but visually, the process map often allows you to get, the stakeholders just understand it more readily. I was in a tool or watching a demo of a tool called Lucid Chart, which we're going to get to tools in a little bit at the end, towards the end. But they have an ability to put in your process map and automatically create a chart, or sorry, not a map, to put in your text if you have it well defined that way and create a chart. So that's becoming a more common tool. If you really don't like the visual piece, that might be something to look at as well. Okay, lots of comments here about liking process maps. I really like swim lanes. Yes, me too. I'm a big fan of swim lanes. Okay, so what if you're not a BA, right? So what if you are an aspiring BA? And I'm curious if anyone here is looking to start a business analyst career, because that's a really important piece as well. Or a process mapping can be a great way to start building business analysis experience. So again, you don't have to be in a BA role to do business process mapping or to map a process. So one example from one of our course participants is Wendy. Wendy was in a software development team, and she ended up creating a role for herself as a business analyst. But what she did was she mapped the business process that her software development team used to make adjustments to a certain kind of code and release a certain kind of code. And it was a really laborious process that people thought needed to be automated and streamlined and all these things. And as she went through and actually documented what needed to be happened, they found so many opportunities to improve the manual steps that they didn't end up needing to automate those steps. It became a much more efficient process as a result. Also, she got to present that to some senior level stakeholders, and so got some visibility from the business, and then got into a new business analyst role was created for her to support her product manager. So just a great way of kind of how one business analysis experience can lead to another and help position you for a business analyst role. Another example, we had somebody who was working in a nonprofit environment, and there was a really complex donor management process that she was somewhat managing, but also just needed to get a handle on. And she analyzed that process, created a very complex process for their restricted giving process. And then also ended up like people saw that and were like, wow, we need more of this in the organization, right? Can you go and create more of those for us? And so that's another example of one technique like this leading to other techniques. And as I mentioned, like even if you're not a BA or don't have an aspiration to be a tried and true BA, I think everyone in some degree is a BA, kind of whether they want to be or not, right? But you might have a process you just want to improve, and mapping it is a great place to start. You might have an area of your business that you want to streamline and systematize. So within Bridging the Gap, we've mapped a bunch of processes recently, from delivering workshops to joining our membership to processing an invoice. You know, we have detailed procedures for almost everything that we do. And it's just a really key part of running a business. So the chat has been amazing. I've been kind of keeping tabs, but not, I didn't want to get too distracted. But I would love to hear now, like, what business process, for those of you who've done this before, what business process have you mapped recently? I think it's so interesting to start to see what the names are and what types of processes people have mapped. It gives you a great idea of what the possibilities are within the organization or within the space of process mapping, and also, might initiate an idea if you're sitting, well, what process would I map? How would I use this in my career? Just hearing those examples can be really, really helpful. I just want to share a couple of comments while you're doing that. Recently got hired as a project support specialist and looking to focus on business analyst. So process mapping is a great way to start to do that. Your project support role probably needs some processes, some documentation of how you do that. And it will allow you to showcase some of your BA skills and build that BA experience on the job as well. Cornelia says, yes, I'm studying for the ECBA and a beginner in this domain. And so getting a certification is a great step in terms of showing your knowledge. Most employers are also looking for the combination of knowledge and experience. And so that can be really defeating for a lot of people who feel like they're entering the profession, and like, how do you get experience if you're not in the role, and how do you get the role if you don't have the experience, right? Like the chicken and the egg scenario. So the way you do that is you start by doing business analysis exactly where you're at. And that's business process analysis. It's a great place to start because, like I said, there's just always opportunities to do that. This one, that would be me. I was doing process mapping, but 20 years ago, and now I want to come back. Welcome, welcome. All right. Let's see, what processes have people shared? I've had the experience in different orgs where stakeholders and product managers prefer doing the process maps themselves. How do you handle this one as the one with the BA job title and there's an overlap in the work? So that's a great question. So I think it's great. First of all, it's great. So many BAs complain of the opposite, where I can't even get my stakeholders to sit down and give me the details to create a process map, right? So like the beauty and the benefit of your experience is that your stakeholders are engaged, they have a process mindset, they're thinking about what their processes are. So I mean, you want to always meet people where they're at. So you can meet by reviewing those process maps as a starting point. You could start to do the more textual, detailed modeling um, and focus more on the improvement opportunities or the projects that come from looking at those processes. You could support them by looking at the bigger picture. We're going to talk about that in a bit as well. So just think, how can I support them, but also how can I validate the analysis they've done? Sometimes, and I won't say that this is, the case in those stakeholders, but sometimes they might be a little bit light, or they might not think through all the exceptions or the variations on a process. And so you can come in and really do some more detailed analysis and ask some follow-up questions and help flesh those process maps out into a better level of detail. So that would be some ideas. So just some examples. Jennifer says employee recruiting and onboarding, implementation of a CRM system. So that's a big process. And then even within that, you would have all the CRM related processes. So contact leads, send proposal, manage issues, right? Like all the processes that the business users are using to the CRM for, as well as the process that the tech team or the team as a whole might have to implement a CRM if that's something you're doing again and again. Payment audit process, wonderful. Invoice process for a travel agency. Mapped a process for our annual life cycle. Sounds interesting. Recruitment process, very cool. Switching from one system to another and transitioning new users. So that sounds like a big project that has processes within it. So you might end up with set up new user and migrate data, right? You might have a few processes within that for sure. Configure product process. I recently mapped a process for the construction department based in Dubai. Interesting. All right, student life cycle, construction, overall winning a project to get a bill out the door. Congratulations. Okay. Kenia, insurance software implementation. Okay, so also with that, when you have several processes within that insurance software, like what are the processes that the business users are using that insurance software to implement? And that could be some of the processes that you map as well. Lifelong learner admissions process. Some says loads within the financial industry. Okay, lots of examples here. So if you're kind of stuck, I would encourage you to, read through some of these examples and just see what lands with you. Like, oh, our company has an invoicing process. Our company has a recruitment process, right? We have a lot of these processes as well. You can also always start with your business and analysis process or your software development process. Right. So that would be if you are in a BA role or some sort of technology role, that would be another place to start. Got a question of, will this live session in the forthcoming workshop count for PDs, CDUs? So that's the LinkedIn Live itself should count for CDUs. It would be, it's just a general webinar. So that's a little bit different with IIBA. The business process mapping workshop does count for 3 PDs or CDUs, and that is pre-approved with IIBA. Okay, I will get to the workshop. I promise. Okay. So what's the example? So just back to this example of what it looks like. And I just want to, we're going to do a deep dive in the how next week, but this is just, what are these different elements? What does it look like? So one of the things to just pay attention to is, first there's these swim lanes. Right? The swim lanes represent different roles in the process. So very often, like not one person does all the different steps, right? So that's a piece. So, knowing who does what is an important piece. And then within those swim lanes are different activities. Those are those rectangular boxes. They represent different tasks. And then you'll see also some diamonds. Those diamonds are for decisions. So when, you'll see 2 lines going from, or at least 2, sometimes there could be 3, sometimes there could be more. So when we don't have just one path through the process, but there's like a yes, no decision that goes to 2 different parts of the flow. So that's the decision diamonds. And then there's lines connecting it all together. And some of the most common mistakes I see are just like those lines not clearly showing the flow of the process, or you might just sort of have a rectangle kind of hanging out there that doesn't have a line leading to the end in any way. You might kind of have zigzags back and forth, and you can kind of get lost in loops that never end, right? Like just recurring processes that never end. You really want to make sure there's a logical progression and that everything flows from beginning to the end eventually. And then another piece would be ambiguous activity names. So one of the tips I give people is always start your activity name with a verb. The same thing with your process name. So you might have heard me rephrase some of the process names because I just do it so almost automatically at this point. But like an infrastructure process becomes manage hardware, right? Or manage this type of hardware, like something really concrete and specific so that you know what the outcome of the whole overall process is. The same rule applies to those tasks. So in this case, we have a hire employee process, which would be part of like the recruitment process, right? But hire employee gives you a sense of our goal in this process, or the outcome of this process is to hire an employee, not onboard an employee, not post a job posting, though that's kind of included in here, not the entire recruitment process, but hire the employee. And so you kind of can start to think about when that process starts and when it ends. So how do you choose a process to map? So we talked about this quite a bit already, but like if you're a VA, like don't look any further than your active project work. You probably have plenty of processes to map. And I would say this is true even if you typically focus just on the software requirements. You can look at a process around the software requirements, maybe where your stakeholders are getting stuck, like we talked about, where you're not quite, we're kind of going in circles around what decisions to make, or we seem to be rehashing what we want the software to do. Often that's because we don't really understand what the current state and future state business processes are. So taking that step back to the business process level is going to give you a lot more clarity to move into the software requirements level. If you are not a BA, you can always look at a process you do today, but that's not documented. It might not be even completely understood. And as a bonus, you want to look at processes that touch multiple different people. So if you could find a process where somebody in another department or even on your team is using an input or creating an input for you, or using an output that you create, and you can kind of look at that whole process end to end, just gives you a sense of a bigger picture of a process. I mentioned that I did that for my cash flow process, and part of that was looking at some of the pieces that my husband managed and being able to show what I needed from him when, in order to have the money in the right accounts, and kind of what the back and forths were, right? So that's, your partner is also a great stakeholder to keep thinking about when you're thinking about how to just practice this in a real world kind of simulated way. And then always also be thinking about an error-prone process. So what is always causing problems in your organization, right? Where's the frustration point? And what, using this business process map to really start to look at what the root cause of those issues are. That's what Wendy did with her software development process. That's what Lane did with the donor management. And if you are actively seeking a BA role, which some of you said you are, like tackling something that is annoying to people and that's causing problems is a quick path to getting noticed for more on-the-job opportunities. Because when you do that, it becomes visible. People notice it. And it's a good kind of attention of, we had this really challenging process, and this person helped us at least understand what the problems were, and maybe even helped us fix some of them, right? And when you that gets you on people's radar, it gets you noticed, and then people tend to come to you for help in similar situations. So you can always start right where you're at, even if you're not in a business analyst role in your organization. And if anybody happens to have an example of where that worked for them to share in the chat, I would love to hear that. I always love celebrating those stories. And I also just feel like I share that again and again, and I see so many examples of it. But it's hard. It feels a little hard to believe. Like, are you sure, Laura, that could really happen for me? And I do believe that it really could happen for you. And it happens I've just seen it happen so many times. It's how I really got started in my VA career. But it's helpful to hear it from somebody in the wild too. Okay, so we've been getting some questions about the process mapping workshop. I'm going to take a quick sip of water. So I'm going to answer some FAQs, and also if you have any other questions about business process mapping that you would like me to answer today, I would love to answer those as well. So I'm going to talk about like how to handle the level of detail. That question came up so many different times, and also what tools to use. But before I do that, I just want to quickly share about this business process mapping workshop that we're running next week and that there's some interest in. So the workshop is Wednesday, May 15th from 1 to 4 Eastern. It's all about building your process mapping mindset. It is about mapping a process step by step. So when I say it's a workshop, it's a workshop. Like, we will be doing this together, and I will be kind of guiding you step by step through scoping your process, swim lanes, activity boxes, decisions, making sure your lines and flow work, how to handle sub-processes and the starting and ending, and the inputs and the outputs. So I'll be guiding you through all those pieces. I'm going to talk about some of the business process mapping mistakes I see, and I'll share the most common ones that we see and how to correct them. And along the way, I will be answering any questions you have and even reviewing snippets of work. And then we'll have some participants, like time for some participants as well, to share their maps with everyone and get direct feedback from me in the workshop. And that really benefits everyone because you learn from different examples and just seeing different process maps and what the opportunities are to make improvements. We will also have a structured peer review segment, and we ran our first live workshop like this in February and got great reviews of the peer reviews. So we'll break people out into small groups where you'll get the chance to review your process with the other few members of your group. And this is, I think, a really important piece, because when you're doing this work in the wild, like, it's not just about creating the map, right? It's about getting information from stakeholders. It's about validating. It's all that communication aspect that we talked about. And so it's a great opportunity to have a place to practice it with other like-minded people who care about you and your success, and who aren't like trying to just make a few minutes out of their day and worried about all the other things, right? They're there to help you practice as well. And you're there to also provide feedback. And I will say, every time I provide feedback, I learn from that as well. So like, the action of reviewing somebody else's work and giving them some feedback on that is also a great way to learn and really to cement the technique. As I mentioned earlier, you do earn 3 PDs or CDUs with IIBA. And just a new bonus that I'm adding is that we, and this is for anyone who's already joined as well, is what, in addition to the 3-hour session on Wednesday, I'm going to be hosting a bonus office hours section on Thursday, May 16th. And that just gives everyone a bit of time. I know, like, as much as there's going to be value in kind of getting your question answered right then, you know, when you sit on that process overnight and kind of go back and make the tweaks and start to apply what you've been learning along the way, like, we're VAs, we have more questions. And so I'll be sharing, you know, that office hours session will be a time to kind of go through the follow-up questions that you might have. And then I'll also be sharing a little bit more about the next step if you want to work even deeper with me inside the Blueprint program. Okay, I'm going to go ahead quickly here. It takes a second. I can't share it through our StreamYard. So I'm going to share, because we've been getting some requests, the link to, see if I can get into the chat here. The link is visible there. Here's the link to the workshop. The other thing I wanted to mention about it is, if you are interested in joining our flagship program, the Business Analyst Blueprint, that you get access to the workshop for free. So that is another, I'm putting that link in the comments as well. And then finally, I wanted to offer our business process template. That is a totally free resource for those of you who are more textual. It goes along with the business process map. So those should be showing up in the chat now, but let me know if you're not seeing them, because I think it might have gone into the link description. Okay. Hopefully they should be showing up there for you. Okay. So what this is a great time to get other questions in if you have them. And I'm going to start with some of the big FAQs that have come up for as we got going here and as we started talking about process mapping in April, way back in April. And one was just how detailed to get, all right? How to avoid getting too detailed, and how do you avoid getting too detailed, and how do you get to the right level of detail? And one of the big things to think about as you're doing this is to start at a high level first and then drill into the details. So often, like we want to see the high level. I'm going to share an example. So this is our high level. I sat down as part of preparing some sample materials, and like this is the high level of what it takes for us to promote, deliver, set up a workshop. Right? These are all the key pieces. And then you see the one in the middle there has the sub-process lines, those vertical lines. So within that, just promoting the workshop via email, there was probably like another 8 to 10 steps within that and some loops that happened. So like that's its own process map, right? This high level is just sort of the big milestones that we go through to kind of map out the whole process. And then you can get into the specifics, which gets you to the more details behind that. So really, when you're thinking about how you want to map a process, you want to think high level and specifics. And it doesn't mean that your very first map comes out at the high level and then you like geniusly get into the specifics as you do it. Often your first map is a mix of both, right? And you think about some things that end up, oh, wait, that actually needs to get pulled apart. Your first map starts to get way too big and way too complex, and lines are going everywhere. And then you need to pull out the high level pieces of it. So you might be someone that naturally thinks in a top down kind of way and gets the high level first. You might be someone that thinks in a top or a bottom up kind of way, where you start to get some of the details and then you need to break it apart. But the tips that I want to share is just whatever you can do to keep your process map readable on a single screen or a printed page, right? If you can't read it, then you need to simplify it. You need to break it apart into multiple processes. You need to create a high level that shows how they all flow together. So like that boundary, it's kind of artificial, but it's, when you think like, why is a piece of paper the size of a piece of paper is? Why are computer screens the size they are? It's sort of, it's like representative of how much information a human can consume at any given time. Right. And so using that boundary is a useful boundary to start, and if you start to like have things that are scrolling off the screen, or you've got to get things so small that you need a magnifying glass to read them, you need to simplify it in some way or break it apart in some way. And there's no necessarily right or wrong ways. We'll talk about some strategies to break them. I can talk about some strategies to break them apart, but there's like, I think people just think there's like a right place to do it. The right place is really what makes sense in the context of what you're trying to develop for that particular process and what outcome you're trying to achieve from that process. And I saw a ton of comments already coming in about tools, but that's the next question we often receive. So I would love to hear, if you haven't shared already, what tools you use. When you join us for a program, there's no specific tool that I require you to use. I teach foundational principles in a tool agnostic way, right? And a lot of the tools have very similar capabilities when it comes to what they can do. And I often say, if like the tool is getting in the way, then start on paper. That's, there was a time in the world when pen and paper or pencil and paper was a new technology. We don't think of it as a technology today. I really can kind of geek out on some of that stuff in terms of the development of human consciousness. But I really, pen and paper, pencil and paper is a tool. And it is a useful tool as long as you can write clearly and be able to show it to people. Whiteboards are another great, if you are in an in-person physical environment, drawing a process map on a whiteboard is a great place to start. The most common examples I see are Microsoft Visio, Lucidchart, Blippy, Draw.io. I see Figma come up. I've heard of that one before. Yeah, Miro and Mural. Those are more collaboration tools. So I think they're great for building the process map collaboratively. They might not be the best for maintaining them over time. Let's see, pen and paper are my preference. I love that. Yes, thank you. Let's see what else came out here in terms of sticky note. Yes, that can be good too. Okay. The Visio, Dryo, Miro. Thank you. Okay. I saw a question. If you already joined the workshop, would the discount be applied for the blueprint? So if you want to contact us about that, Kania, we can see what we can work with you if you wanted to join the blueprint before the workshop. We can work with you on that for sure. Okay. So I am at this point going to stop sharing my slides and take questions. And I'm sure I missed some. So feel free to, if you have a question, feel free to get it into the chat. This would be a great time to do that. And I'm going to scan back for what I might have missed here. At one time, best practice was to keep a map to no more than 7 parts, the max a person could digest at one time, then expand each step as to what cover what. Yeah, so that's a great, like 7 is great, 10 is a decent number, like readable on one page. Does a technical writer use process mapping? For sure, for sure. So you could use process maps as a way to organize, like show the organization of the technical documents in a process flow. You could use it within a document to accompany like a procedure. Just you've got the visual of how that process flows and then the more detailed technical information underneath it. You could use it a lot of different ways. Let's see. It looks like it would be good to show 2 different processes as well. For example, we have different regions. Okay, I probably missed a thread there on that one. Here's one about swim lanes. Please touch on when to show swim lanes versus leaving them out. I'm accustomed to mapping without first and then using them to show when the process returns to and interrupts a person creating a bottleneck. I really like that. So if you don't use swim lanes, you need to be clear on the role that, and each activity step then needs to have the role name. And so I just think it creates a little bit more clutter and less clarity. And so if you have multiple roles, then it makes sense to use a swim lane. If you notice, my high level process map did not have swim lanes. And that's because when you're looking at the high level, often within each of those boxes, you're going to have multiple roles working together to achieve that high level outcome. So, you know, I didn't even have lines in that, but that was just because it was a working draft to get things on paper. So that would be an example, like a high level process where you would probably not have a swim lane. And if you only were mapping a process and it just had one person in one role, you wouldn't need a swim lane. I just think it's an easier way for a lot of processes with multiple roles. But that being said, like that also is a matter of preference. If it's working for you to leave it out unless you really need it, and it's easy for your stakeholders to review and provide feedback on, then you know it's not a right or wrong. Okay. How detailed to go and how many steps to include and how much info for each box. So this is where the combination of the process map and the process document gets really valuable. So the process document would have these same steps that you reference with just a few words in your process map. And then it would get more granular about what's involved in that step. And you can also then link to more of a procedural detail if you wanted to get step by step into like, where do you click on the screen, right? Like, so that would be more of a procedure than a process when you get into the very specific, like step-by-step detail. So typically though, a process, it's a step that moves the process forward. It's an action that someone can take. It's not all the detail behind it. But it's enough detail that you're going to have enough benchmarks to know, like, is there a decision that needs to be made here? You know, are we moving forward in the flow, right? So what's more important though than like how detailed to go is that you have a consistent level of detail across your different steps. So when you're looking at one process map, you don't have something that's super high level and then something that's super detailed. Okay. All right. Let's see. All right, I'm going to go to the more recent comments. So at this point, I'm kind of done scrolling back. So if you, I'm going to pick up kind of with this comment here. And if you have, so if I missed your question, this is what I'm trying to say. If I missed your question, please repost it. Okay. What's the best collaborative process mapping tool? I would love to hear what everybody thinks about that. I think for collaboration, having a tool like one of the whiteboard tools like Miro or Mural, or even an online tool like Lucidchart has a lot of collaboration options that go with it. Those are great choices. But again, what does everyone think? And I shared the link to the Blueprint program. What I will say about it, it is all content for all 4 of those modules. So business process analysis, use cases, wireframes, data modeling, and the end-to-end business analysis process framework, as well as monthly office hour sessions with me to ask your questions, as well as an online forum where you can share deliverables and get detailed feedback from me on the work that you're doing as a business analyst, as well as just ask any questions that are coming up in between our calls. So it's part community, part teaching, part content, and it's really a robust program. And we've been adding in these workshops as well that we're inviting, hosting publicly, as well as inviting our Blueprint members into the country. Okay, let's see. Where can I get a bank of questions or problem statements to prepare business process maps? So we actually do have I did not even look at these questions, I swear, before. We have a bank of questions called the Requirements Discovery Checklist Pack. It's on, if you go to bridgingthegap.com and click templates, it's one of the template toolkits we sell. And it's also in that product, we have questions around for each feature, kind of area of feature or functionality. What would be the problem identifications, like why might you implement this feature, as well as what would be the granular questions. So that would be a great resource. Also, that's a great resource or a great thing to use ChatGPT for, right? So when you're thinking about what this business process is, putting a bit about your process into ChatGPT and asking for what questions and what nuances you should be thinking of is a great way to kind of have a collaborator in that. How many roles can it be used in a swim lane? Is there a limit on the number of roles? It kind of, theoretically you could have hundreds, right? But that wouldn't be very readable. So I would think like the maximum that you might want to do in a readable way would be 5. Often I land around 3 or 4. So again, it's just that readability perspective. And if there could be a time where it's like the process is more about the handoffs. And so having that kind of expand a bit could be really valuable because of what you're trying to show with that process. So there's no hard limit, but just think about what are you trying to show, and is this process map actually communicating that? Okay. Is there an efficient way to show when multiple groups are doing a process differently? Ooh. That's one of the key values of sitting down to work with people on a process map, right? Is that you are starting to, you get them in the room together and they see like they can't get agreement because their maps are different. So I would say the efficient way to show that would be to do a process mapping session where those people are in the room together, and having that discussion, with the goal being making it more consistent, because often when people are doing it differently, that's creating some sort of problem either upstream or downstream. And so, just having them talk through it and come up with what they want their standard to be going forward. I guess you could kind of overlay or show them side by side, or kind of color code what the different steps are and try to show it all together as some alternatives. Okay. Let's see. Do you have examples of the support documents for the process map? I do. That template I shared, the business process template would be the template that I would use as a support document. Okay. Read the level of detail needed. Often helpful to focus on what is being done while staying out of the steps someone goes through it and how to do it. Yes, that's a great approach. Yeah. Okay. Um, Felicia, oh, this is a reply. So we have an enterprise level process flow, an event response process flow, and an actor test process flow. So yeah, I think that's to the point, like when you're starting this as a skill set, you're going to start at the level that makes sense for what you're trying to accomplish. When you get into an organization that has a much more robust business process methodology, then there could be standards in place, which is, I think, what Taiwo was speaking to, right? We have a standard of kind of what our levels are and what goes into those levels in our organization. And so you want to be aware of that as a business analyst as well, like what standards are in place in your organization. That wouldn't preclude you, though, from doing a process map for your own work in the way, like starting where you're at and given the information that you have, to because that skill set of learning how to put the process map together is going to be transferable no matter kind of what those levels are in the organization that you need to map to going forward. Okay, Karen says Mural is a great for collaboration to get the details in the workshop, and then Visio for documenting. Yeah, I've heard that as a pretty consistent theme. Like a collaboration tool is great in that collaborative setting, and then you want to be capturing it in a different tool. Excuse me. Thank you, Angela, for sharing the link. Yes. Okay. Let me see if I can add that link in the chat again too, the free template. See. Did the workshop link show up in the chat? It didn't come through mine. Thank you. I just reshared it. Is there a preference for horizontal versus vertical swim lanes, or do we need to determine? Yeah, I personally love horizontal because I just like to see things move from left to right. Or I guess if you're watching me on the screen, left to right, right? Like, so I have a strong preference for horizontal, but again, there's no right, wrong. And again, it could matter on real estate if you had a process where you wanted to show more swim lanes for one reason and show a lot of those handoffs, like a vertical landscape view could give you more room for more swim lanes. I tend to go horizontal. All right. What other questions do you have? I've got a few more minutes here if we want to continue on. Okay. See. They're great questions, by the way. BPMN or flowchart, does it make a difference mapping out processes? So there is a ton of conversation about BPMN. If you go to my LinkedIn profile and go back just a couple of weeks, I actually did a post on BPMN. I actually, it's in my newsletter. So if you go to my profile and click on my newsletter, first of all, please subscribe. I'd love to have you as a newsletter subscriber. But my most recent newsletter is about when to use BPMN. And I'm going to share my perspective, but I'm also pointing you to that discussion because there was a really rich discussion in the comments with multiple different perspectives. So one of the things that I have learned relatively recently is that BPMN can be done in a simple way. So I used to say, I would not recommend doing BPMN unless there's an organizational reason to do BPMN. And I think that's even what's still in that article. But like swim lanes are a piece of BPMN notation. The lines and arrows are a piece of BPMN notation. Like you can do a BPMN diagram that uses only 5 to 8 different elements, and that is relatively simple. Within BPMN, there's like 40 or 50 or maybe even more elements of notation to handle very nuanced situations. And my problem with that kind of structure is that the average business user is not going to understand what all those things mean. And you're going to spend more time training them on the nuances of the syntax than discovering the details of their business process. So whether it's a flowchart or BPMN, I advise sticking with a simple set of symbols to start and adding complexity only when it's absolutely necessary. And like one of the reasons it might be necessary is if you are actually using your process maps to create code, meaning they're a code generation piece. Then some of those more sophisticated things are incredibly important. But most of the process mapping that's being done by business analysts today does not do that. And so it's just not necessary. Okay. And really often they all mean the same thing. So process maps, flow charts, business process modeling, process diagrams, BPMN, like for the most part, like the essential mindset and the skill set that goes into creating anything but called by any of those names, it's the same. There can just be like little nuances in terms of how you capture some of the elements. Sarah, I do not teach advanced physio. As I mentioned, I'm a tool agnostic, but I did recently connect with a gentleman named Scott Helmer, who's a great Visio expert, and I believe he does some teaching on that topic. Okay. Sandra asked, should you always start off with all the stakeholders or start with each department and then bring them together? That's a great question. I think often you want to start independently and kind of get kind of the sense of the lay of the land before you bring everyone together, unless it's like a domain or a business that you're familiar with. That would be an example where you can just bring everybody in the room because we all know each other. But if you're new to that organization or like there's any sort of stickiness with that project, starting individually can be a great way to start to get everybody's sense of the project. And then you might want to bring the overall picture together and then bring everyone together to start to walk through that and see where the handoffs are wonky or what can be optimized or what's causing problems in terms of how things flow from one department to another. Great question. Okay. All right. What is BPMN? Yeah, BPMN, thank you for asking it, is Business Process Modeling Notation. And it is one formal way of visually modeling a business process. Yeah. Okay. For the upcoming workshop next week, what is needed to get ready to utilize the session very well? Thank you for that question, Ali. I'm so excited to have you join. So we are going to be walking through the process map together. And so all you really just need to choose what tool are you going to be using, even if that's pencil and paper, that's totally fine, but what tool and what process do you want to map? Right, so that's really the two things that you want. And in your pre-workshop materials, there is a list of tools, which we've also talked about today. There's a list of ideas for how to find your process, which we've also talked about today. But just those two things would be great, great input. And then the thing I would say is you want to choose a process that you have some decent knowledge of, that you've done some discovery work on, either because it's a process you do or you've already had some meetings with the stakeholders. It would be hard to map a process that you don't understand in the context of the workshop, because then you're just going to have all the questions for the stakeholders and you won't actually get to mapping. So it might be that between now and then you need to have some sort of a discovery session, or at least an interview with a stakeholder to understand some of it, so you have some raw material to work with for that process map. Okay. All right. And we are at about the top of the hour. And Mari, if you can message us about that, that would be great. And Leanne, who's in our customer service, would be happy to help you with that situation. Let's see. Where do we find the pre-workshop materials? So if you have registered for the business process workshop, then you will get a link with the pre-workshop materials. And so, as I mentioned, that is a 3-hour workshop that I'm hosting next week. That is an investment. I'm so horrible about that, but I did not mention it is an additional investment to do what we're doing in that workshop. It's not a free workshop like this LinkedIn Live is, but then once you register, you will get the workshop materials and can join us. Okay. And can have all those. And if you're a registered participant and you don't have that link, you can email us at info@bridgingthegap.com with hyphens, and we would be happy to help you find that out. All right. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited about the process maps that you're going to create. I think this is such an important foundational skill set. It really sets your skills apart as a business analyst, and no matter what role you're in, I think it's a really important skill set to have. I would love to have as many of you who can join us for the workshop next week. But regardless, please connect or follow me on LinkedIn. I'm going to be sharing other content about business process mapping and other business analysis skills and all the things over the coming weeks. And I would love to be connected with you, and feel free to reach out with any specific questions you might have as you consider your next steps in your business analysis career. So thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited about all the things that are happening in the business analysis profession. And thank you for the positive feedback that's coming in the chat. I'm so glad you found this helpful and informative, and look forward to seeing you the next time, whether that's on another LinkedIn Live like this. We're doing one on June 13th. I'm super excited about it, or the workshop next week. All right. Till next time. Thanks, everyone.